Welcome back to the Wingspan Podcast, episode 48. I'm Doug Barak, joined by my co-host Chris Milholland and Ned Staley, and our special guest. Our guest is the author of a brand new book, Built to Lose: How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever, which just came out on May 4th.
We welcome Jake Fisher back to the podcast. Thank you for taking some time every day to join Doug and I. What's up, man? How you doing?
Doing well, guys. Thank you for having me. How are you?
Pretty good.
Doing well.
Congratulations again on the book.
Yes.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that.
Couldn't have picked a better week.
Yeah, I mean, playing tournament. We got teams tanking for these top picks in 2021. So it's a good time to have a book come out about tanking in the NBA.
Who would have predicted this, right? Unless there's some spoilers ahead. But like I said, since your last appearance, you've now written your first book, which you hinted to us back on episode 17. So it's been a minute. So once again, glad to have you on. So how does it feel to finally have it released?
It's great. I mean, the selling point of the book is that I did 300 plus original interviews with agents, coaches, players, executives, and found out a lot of new information that people aren't going to find anywhere else. So now that we can talk about it, like on shows like yours, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah. So remind our viewers what inspired you to write on this topic, and kind of your writing process to achieve such an amazing achievement. Besides, obviously, the 300 interviews.
That's very kind. Yeah, I mean, I'm from Philly originally. I came into covering the league full time in 2013. I was interning at Slam and writing for Liberty Ballers, the SB Nation Sixers blog, right when Sam Hinkie took over in Philadelphia. And then I was in school in Boston, and I would take that Slam credential and go to TD Garden at night, moonlighting as an NBA reporter. When people forget that Boston traded KG and Paul Pierce to Brooklyn the same exact night that Hinkie traded Drew Holiday to New Orleans for Nerlens Noel. And, it was a lot of executives at that time. Ryan McDonough leaving Boston to go to Phoenix, and Rob Hennigan being poached from Oklahoma City and starting everything in Orlando. There was a big emphasis around the league to, wait out that Miami Heat dynasty, which was running the whole NBA through three guys from that top five of the 2003 draft and the 14 draft, starring Joel Embiid and Andrew Wiggins and Jabari Parker at the time, which does have Julius Randle down at the bottom. And he was considered to be like the seventh guy, that top seven. That 2014 class was considered to be the best class since 2003. So it just made sense that a lot of these teams thought, instead of competing against Miami, let's wait a little bit, let's punt a few years, and we'll collect the next generation of superstars. And by the time Miami's dynasty has crumbled a little bit, we'll be contending. And that's kind of happened in Philly and Phoenix. Boston obviously isn't there right now, but they were in the conference finals for a couple of years. And as you guys know, they drafted Jaylen Brown thanks to that pick from the Nets trade. So clearly, I think the strategy worked and had its dividends.
Yeah, no, definitely. And what were some of your favorite moments, writing the book, and some of your favorite stories within the story?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm not a Sixers fan anymore, but growing up, I definitely was. And getting to talk to guys like Thaddeus Young and Spencer Hawes and Evan Turner for hours on end was pretty awesome. I mean, Thad, I met up with him in a hotel at the Pacers team lobby back when he was with Indiana, sometime I think 2018-19, some hotel by Madison Square Park. And, we just met up in the lobby. He told me, a breaking news detail about Andrew Bynum hurting his knees again while walking his dogs on a gravel road, and how he walked up to Bynum, that next day in practice and was like, "Hey, big man, do you want to play for us this year?" And Bynum was like, "Yeah." And he said, "How much money are you making?" And Bynum said, 17, 18 million. He said, "Well, you'll pay someone to play to walk your dog so you can play for us, man." And like those little details are fascinating. I mean, the little personality traits and that stuff, even to like finding out some crazy transactional stuff. I mean, it tied into Brooklyn. Like, remember when Andrew Karolinko got traded to Philly? That was supposed to be, it was like a handshake deal with Billy King and Sam Hinkie, that Hinkie was just going to cut Andre, and he was going to be able to go be a free agent and sign anywhere he wanted. But he had his wife at the time was having a really difficult pregnancy in New York, and he didn't want to uproot his family to go to the tanking Sixers. But Philly still, they end up finding him and finding him and finding him to the point where it had to go to arbitration with the players union. So details like that, I think, fans don't really have a true insight into stories such as that one that, I've kind of shed some light on it now and gotten to the bottom of it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that's very interesting aspects that we don't really get to see and appreciate from that kind of, you know. So, what other moments and other interviews really stood out to you? Like, what were some of the people that you wouldn't necessarily expect to talk to on these, you know,
Yeah.
Hinkie changed the league, to put it that way?
Yeah, I mean, the book covers a lot of teams. It jumps over to Sacramento a lot because, and I really think the book is an anecdotal history of a bunch of different case studies of tanking. So Philly's the most brazen rebuild. Boston, they're the team that they moved on from their stars before it was too late, right? They sent KG and Paul Pierce to Brooklyn before, as you guys know. They weren't too good with the Nets. On the flip side, the Lakers held on to Kobe, and even though as Kobe's, tearing his Achilles and hurting his shoulder and hurting his knee, they're still trying to chase free agents and build a contender around a 36-year-old, 37-year-old guy whose body was falling apart. The Kings are in there because they never tanked good enough. They were never in the top 3 pick conversation, to the point where, they have the Aaron Fox now, and obviously they just locked into Tyrese Halliburton at 12, but they're still 15 years out of the playoffs, and it doesn't look like that's going to be changing anytime soon. So the details I found out about Sacramento are crazy. I mean, I didn't expect George Karl to call me. I got in touch with him through an assistant coach of his throughout the years who passed along his number. And I called George Karl at the time that we had agreed upon, and he doesn't answer. Typical. That happens all the time in this business. And one day randomly, I think I was coming back into my apartment from the gym, like still sweaty, and I look down at my phone buzzing, and it says George Karl. So I run over to my desk, I turn on the recorder, and he just starts telling me all these crazy details about the Kings and all the different machinations and palace intrigue that was happening in there. I mean, there's this crazy scene where in 2015, Vivek Ranadive was very involved in that Kings management style. And he gave them a mandate after the 14-15 season when they fired Mike Malone. They brought in George Karl midway through the year. He said, 15-16 this next season, I want you to turn this crap team into a 50-win team. So George Karl goes to the whiteboard and he's crossing out players on the Kings roster that he thinks aren't good enough to be part of a 50-win team. It's only 4 or 5 names left. One of them was DeMarcus. But remember, George Karl came from the Denver Nuggets previously, where they trade Carmelo Anthony to the Knicks. They got this big poo-poo platter back with Andre Iguodala and Costa Koufos and all Timothy Mozgov and whatever, and they make the 3 seed in the playoffs. So he just speculates, maybe we'll trade DeMarcus and get more players back, and that will be our formula. That's what leaks out publicly to the whole snake in the grass. George Karl's trying to trade DeMarcus thing. Remember that? So to mend those fences, there's this amazing detail where George Karl told me this. They, in Vegas, teams go all over the state of Nevada to these massive high schools to practice. And while the summer league team of like second-year players and journeyman guys are all practicing across the hall of this high school, George Karl, Vlade Divac, and DeMarcus Cousins went to this high school cafeteria. The soda fountain was still on. They filled up iced teas and Diet Cokes, and they sat around this, cafeteria table and tried to clear the air to move forward. So those types of details, like I thought I would ultimately get, but like you never know where they're going to come from, and I didn't think I was going to get them from George Karl.
Would you say that's the strangest story in the book?
There's a lot of strange stories. Like there's one where Evan Turner and Spencer Hawes, I don't know if you guys really remember this, but Evan tweeted out at one point that 2013-14 season that that Spencer had Barack Obama toilet paper. And the truth behind that story is they, were trying to go that All-Star break to fly to Puerto Rico to meet with girlfriends. And instead they got rained out due to inclement weather. So, they're a couple days shy of the trade deadline. They know they're on the block. They're probably going to get moved. They just went and camped out in Spencer's house and started drinking all the alcohol that he had, to try to drain his stash. And sure enough, in that drunken stupor, Evan's in the bathroom. They run out of toilet paper. He's digging through the cabinet. And what does he find? The only toilet paper left in the house was this gag gift somebody got Spencer Hawes because he is a Republican, But sure enough, Evan Turner tweets it out, and everyone thinks that Hawes uses Barack Obama toilet paper. So funny shit like that. I mean, I do think there's a lot of funny moments in the book.
Are there any outtakes they may save for the next book?
I mean, I put a lot of outtakes in these deleted scenes that I try to put out every 2 weeks on my Substack
Very cool.
thing that came out. It's done now, but there was this great detail. Evan Turner, when he got to Boston, he had all the players come over his house, this mansion in Cambridge, Mass, where he'd have a chef and a barber, and he'd have 7-8 guys come over, and they just watch a UFC or whatever game was on that night, and they just kind of hang out. It was just ET Wednesdays is what they called it. So that was a really cool detail. I couldn't fit in the book, but I definitely put it out there publicly, and people seem to like it a lot.
So how many hours do you think you spend researching this topic, like the whole book itself and putting it together?
Man, I couldn't put a number on it, but I mean, of those 300 plus interviews, I'd say at least 15 of them were hours long. I talked to one guy, this exec at the time, Lance Pearson from the Sixers. I talked to him for 6 total hours. I mean, and before you got on the phone with these guys, I mean, my style is I try to read everything I can that's available online before I check out to these people. So I mean, it took me over 3 years to really, before when I started actually thinking this was a book and I could work on it, to May 4th. It was a long process for sure. Not pun intended, definitely.
Well, I was gonna say, did you intentionally choose May 4th, like for any particular reason? Like I think of it as just Star Wars, but like, is there any way you connect your book to Star Wars, or is it just a great coincidence?
Definitely just a coincidence. That's honestly, I'm sure you guys know at this point, the big trope in the business is like the editors write the headline, right? The publishers pick the publish date. So, I mean, I'm not mad about it. I think we've had a good window here. I think there's been some good excitement so far. And if people could continue to buy it, I'd greatly appreciate it. Available on Amazon, bookshop.org, wherever.
May the tank be with you.
May the tank be with you. Yeah, definitely.
So I got something you were talking about earlier, where you were talking about different tanking styles and mentioning the Kings of how they do, and media coverage of that. So what about the Thunder? Not a lot of people are talking the way about the Thunder like they did with the 76ers. So can you talk about your kind of opinion on the way these teams have been covered in their styles of tanking? Obviously, we've seen the effect of Phillies, and it's too early for the Thunder, but I feel like everyone's praising the Thunder.
Definitely.
Not in the way that the 76ers were. And we're in a different era, as you mentioned, and as your book states clearly in the title itself. So can you talk about those comparisons, contrasts, and will there be, when the next book comes out, a good portion on the Thunder?
Yeah, I think what was a big issue in Philly was, no offense to Oklahoma City, but Philadelphia is obviously a much larger media market, right? The number 4 market in the country, and that team is a much more storied franchise. Apologies to the Seattle Supersonics history, but Philly has, I mean, they always advertise themselves as being the 3rd winningest franchise in league history in terms of playoff wins and all that type of stuff. And I think the fact that Sam wasn't really speaking publicly, Sam Hinkie, not Sam Presti, was an issue too. I mean, he wouldn't speak to anybody outside of the trade deadline and around the draft, and that really rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And I mean, one thing I will say that I also think, hope and tanking for the future has become more acceptable, like you mentioned. I think fans are bullish on that concept of not now, but because later. But also, I think the fact that owners aren't complaining about fans not filling the stands when OKC comes to their arena this year because of the pandemic. I mean, I think that's a real factor in this equation. There isn't that opportunity to complain about lack of paying customers for a poor product because there aren't many paying customers regardless because of the health and safety restrictions this year. So I think that's the combination of why OKC just hasn't really gotten that real attention.
Yeah, no, definitely. And do you think that the GMs going forward should look at your book to know what to do and what not to do when tanking and building a team?
Maybe. I mean, the book definitely comes to the central thesis of like, if you're gonna have this plan, you got to stick to it. Like even Philly, like they're here now. They're the number 1 seed in the East, probably, depending on how things work out. And even still, they pulled the rug out from Sam Hinkie, And it took them a couple wayward years to really get here, right? Like it's the 2020-21 season. Sam Hinkie got pushed out in 2016. So it's been 5 years between Sam Hinkie's last days running that organization to where they're now like considered the best team in the East. Obviously, apologies to you guys, and the health situations in Brooklyn hasn't really allowed them to really make as earnest an effort for it. But I think that's a perfect example, and I think just team building in general, it's all over the book. Whether it's Joel Embiid breaking his foot in the Cavs workout. I mean, Cleveland officials still maintain to this day, back in 2014, that Embiid broke his foot while working out for the team, and they probably would have taken him number one overall if he stayed healthy. So if you flash that forward, Philly's ending up with Andrew Wiggins. They are not a juggernaut built around an MVP candidate, Joel Embiid. So there's always unforeseen variables that come into play, injuries come into play, and I think the best way to rebuild truly is to it doesn't really matter what your plan is, but you got to stick to it thoroughly. You can't second guess yourself, and when those situations arise, an injury or whatever, it's all about mitigating those mistakes and those bad breaks, and staying the course and sticking to what you truly believe in.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely see that with Sean Marks, with the way he kind of flipped. It was like flipping houses, the way he found his diamonds and flipped them and all those type of things. It was a less brutal in comparison to the 76ers way. So we'll see how much Thunder, will break, because they are doing it under the radar, as you mentioned, because there aren't a lot of fans to truly be in that environment to cause such a ruckus. But
yeah, the Thunder is going to be interesting long term, especially being that they've got all his first round picks, right? They can't have 17 first round picks on the roster over 3 years. And Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is about to get off his rookie deal in a couple of years. There's going to be some interesting crossroads that the Thunder get to pretty soon.
Yeah, no, definitely. And before I ask the last question about kind of what's next for Author, what are some other important things that you want to let the readers know before they open it up?
Again, I think it's the original reporting and the storytelling that is gonna, separate this book and make people come back for more. I've already mentioned some details already. One of my other favorite stories is, to illustrate the type of teacher and developer and nurturer that Brett Brown was, and why Hinkie hired him in Philly in the first place. He walked into Dell Demps one day, who was the GM, ironically, that New Orleans had trading for Jrue Holiday. Before that, he was in San Antonio with Brett. He was in the lap pool, floundering around, not able to swim really. And Brett walks in and says, "You know what? I'm going to come back here tomorrow at 6 a.m. I'm going to teach you how to swim." And for weeks, these two grown men would go in the pool wearing their black Adidas Spurs gear, and Brett would help him learn how to swim. Brad Stevens brought this assistant coach, Ron Norred, who was a player. If people remember, he was a point guard on those Butler championship. They didn't win the title, but the two teams that made the championship game. Norred was living in Brad Stevens' basement, but as an assistant coach for the Celtics. And he'd come up and have dinner with the family every night. And at the end of dinner, Brad and his wife Tracy they put the kids to bed, and then Brad, Tracy, and Ron would play this game Racco. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. It's kind of like Gin Rummy, where you draw cards and you have to order them in sequential order, but you have to swap them at a certain point. And whenever Brad would win, he'd sign the score sheet like a painter signing his finished work. So details like that are fascinating. I've got trade negotiations in there that I haven't really talked about, but there's just so much. I had a friend of mine just text me recently. He finished the book like an hour ago. He said the detail in there, my God, that was a direct quote. So that's what I pride myself on, making those extra calls, making every extra effort I can to figure out what color tie somebody was wearing or what time it was when the conversation happened. And I think the book is pretty good because of that.
That's the way I like text the most, when I can imagine it and kind of be infused like I'm in a movie. So I definitely appreciate that. And it's something I thought of that was like a couple days old when we're recording this is, so Daryl Morey invited Sam Hinkie, at least through Twitter, and who knows, if Hinkie has a burner or not, like a previous GM. So what do you think about that? Do you anticipate Hinkie making a playoff appearance?
I would bet no. I think Daryl just knows what he's doing publicly. I think Daryl is really good at stoking the fire of
Oh yeah.
NBA Twitter and getting attention and becoming a beloved type of figure like he is. And he knows the fan base. He knows that they would absolutely go bonkers if Sam Hinkie came and rang the bell. But I think the big time people in that organization, the owners, the president pulling the strings behind the scenes. I don't think they really want Sam affiliated with this team anymore, and I'd be very shocked if he. I mean, I'm not saying it won't happen, but I'd be surprised if he showed up and rang the bell.
Yeah. So lastly, when does the next book come out?
Hopefully in next 2-3 years. The more we sell this thing, the better the odds I have at getting another one and working on that. I definitely have some ideas in the can I'm kicking around with my agent and starting to make some calls on. So hopefully, by 2024, there'll be another one for
Well,
sure.
if you want to spit them any out right now, we're all ears.
I can't. Unfortunately, I cannot. But I'm thinking something to do 80s, 90s. I'll give you that type of a tease.
Good enough for me.
Well, yeah, all that stuff was very well said about your book. Can't wait to read that coming from myself. But let's talk about obviously then the regular season, right? It's winding down. Playoffs are starting up very soon. And let's trace back to obviously your 76ers days, right? So someone who covered the 76ers, and like you said, you grew up watching them as well. So obviously top seed in the East, they're up on the Nets a game. And obviously as the stuff pans out, 2 games left in the regular season. Most likely Sixers are going to be the one. Nash told us today that, hey, we're fine with the second. So if the two teams meet down the line in the playoffs, how do you think that series is going to go?
I think the context behind the series is really important. I think the fact that if Philly can avoid Miami in the 4-5 matchup, they're going to get the winner. They're going to get the 8 seed, right? And that 8 seed team is going to have. They will definitely have played 2 games in the play-in tournament. That's just how it's structured. Then they'll play the winner of maybe Atlanta and New York, let's say. I don't think either of those teams, as good as seasons as they've had and as good stories as they are, I don't think either of those teams can really give Philly a real run. So then the Sixers show up in the conference finals against Brooklyn, let's say, after having a really tough series, maybe against Milwaukee. Maybe Brooklyn has an easy time and they take care of Milwaukee, just like that. But if it's hyped up to be this 2-3 matchup like it could be, that's going to leave whoever emerges from that round, pretty banged up or pretty just beaten from, a hard fought series against Philly, who kind of just sleptwalked into there. That gives the Sixers a massive advantage. And I was a big, proponent of Brooklyn being the favorite. I mean, they are obviously one of the greatest offenses of all time, but I don't think it's a non-issue that Harden, KD, and Kyrie haven't had a ton of run together in close games against good teams. I think no matter what, you can roll the ball out and have a high pick and roll with 2 of those 3 guys. But that means that one of those guys is going to have to be comfortable watching on the sideline. And that also means, that they're going to have to figure out how to guard with all 3 of those guys on the court at the same time in crunch time too. And it's something that I'm curious about. And I do at this point in time, I am slightly leading towards Philly over Brooklyn in the playoffs. I really am. That wasn't the case a couple weeks ago, though.
And then you talked about that. Obviously, the road to the playoffs is very big. That's really what kind of comes down to, especially when you're that deep into a playoff run. What opponents meet who? Obviously, with the play-in tournament, we don't know who's going to rise out of those final seeds. But so let's kind of dive a little deeper into the Nets Sixers, right? So, what are some of your major keys in that series when you look at the matchups, and who do you think some of the X factors are? And I'll share my X factors.
Yeah, I think the obvious is who's going to guard Joel Embiid, right? Like if Blake Griffin's the guy who's running up against Giannis Antetokounmpo and he can barely guard him, Blake's not doing that well against Joel Embiid either. And DeAndre, I know he had a little bit of a way against Joel the last time they matched up in Philly, but I don't think anybody in the NBA is really giving DeAndre much of a shot against Joel over a 7-game series. So that's the one thing. But also on the flip side, Ben Simmons is arguably Defensive Player of the Year, and he can probably do as good a job on any of those 3 creators for Brooklyn as anybody, but he can only guard one of them at a time. Tobias is have to guard one of those guys too. Who's the third guy that the Sixers are going to rely on in crunch time to guard one of those 3 guys? Is it Matisse Thybulle? If it is, he obviously has a lot of shortcomings on the offensive side of the ball. For Brooklyn, we mentioned the fourth quarter stuff before, we mentioned the guarding, Embiid thing, but other than that, I don't see a weakness for them. I mean, they have KD, Kyrie, and Harden. They are deep. I mean, the Lakers have fallen down the standings partially because when they lose AD and LeBron, what's left behind them is not really as complimentary as what Brooklyn has. The Nets are deep. I mean, down to Bruce Brown, down to even, I think Landry Shamet is someone who gets kind of overlooked outside of the Brooklyn sphere. Like, people don't really consider him to be like a rotation piece. He's not going to swing a playoff series for Brooklyn, but he's someone who we've seen time and time again can come off the bench and get hot. Same with TLC. Like, the Nets have a lot of players that I think that depth is going to really help them make it through this gauntlet of the postseason, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most definitely, and exactly. Because the thing with the Nets is, right, they got the big three. They got KD, Kyrie, Harden, right? And then outside of that, you got three of those guys guard, especially on offense. That's where it comes down to. Defense is a whole different issue. And then you look at who the complementary pieces are around, right? Are you going to leave Joe Harris open, who's percentage-wise, if not 1-2, they're always going back and forth now with this regular season, percentage-wise. And you got Landry Shamet, who you mentioned, Bruce Brown, who's kind of like that cleanup guy, does all the little things. And the center rotation with DJ, right? Obviously, Nash made his rotation around the center position based on matchups. And as we've seen over the past couple of games, Blake has been taking on a lot of those big bodies down low. Then you look at DJ, what he's doing now, what he did against Embiid last time. Obviously, Embiid put up big numbers, but he put up the best fight out of anyone in that Nets unit that could really mostly defend him. So it's going to be interesting to see. I like that. I agree on all your points there. And then the really final two questions I have for you on the series is, like, what do you want to see from, like, each team if you were kind of mostly orchestrating their game plans? So I guess you could start with Philly, for example, since you're very well familiar with that franchise.
Yeah, I think the Tybal thing is really the big X factor, and it's something that I think Sixers fans and local writers have been talking about all year long. I mean, per minute, he's arguably one of the top 5 defenders in the entire NBA. But the shortcomings on offense, they're very reminiscent to, Andre Robertson back in OKC. And I wouldn't be surprised if Brooklyn just didn't guard him at all. They just left him wide open. For the Nets, I think, again, how they figure out that big man rotation is going to be ultimately key. Because also Blake and DeAndre, they both are not, young, spry guys anymore. And the pounding they're going to take over a 7-game series, that's the big question, I think, with Brooklyn. How long will the series go? Like, you can roll the ball out and they can score and score and score. But the more time you give an opponent to scheme for you and to throw things at you that, you might not have been prepared for, I think that puts everybody at a disadvantage, and especially a team that has a lot of big defensive holes.
And then obviously you said earlier you're flipping back and forth between Philly and Brooklyn, and obviously Philly has the edge, like you mentioned before. So how far do you think that series goes, if you want to give a game count, and why?
I mean, I want it to go 7, probably, right? Who wouldn't want that game to go 7? So, I think I'm taking Philly right now. You can call me a homer on that, but I honestly couldn't care less if the Sixers win. Sure, it'd be great for me personally with the book right now, but as, like, someone who, has a quote-unquote bias, like, I've been to more Nets games the last 5 years than I've been to Philly games. I go to Barclays almost every night pre-pandemic. Doug's seen me in the media section, left and right. I think the Nets are phenomenal. I would love for them to get out too. So I want to see a 7-game series for sure. I hope everyone's healthy too. I mean, that's the obvious thing that we haven't really mentioned here. The health of those 3 guys, the health of Embiid and Simmons. I think that it'd be a shame if that got in the way of giving us the matchup that we all deserve.
Most definitely. And then I'm going to the game, covering the game tomorrow. Big 3 is going to be up tomorrow, according to Nash, see what goes down. So I don't know, a little preview, see what to come. But, yeah, all right. If I had to take a little guess, I think it goes 7-2. Who wouldn't want to see that series go 7? Do I give this edge to the Sixers? Obviously, I don't want health to get in the way, like you said it. I am leaning towards Philly. I'm not going to lie, so I'm taking Philly.
Yeah.
I am leaning towards Philly. I think the Embiid problem and the whole kind of – you just look at that from literally 1 to down the roster. You see how Philly plays, how Brooklyn plays. Chemistry is going to be a big issue. It's not Harden can play it off all he wants, saying, "Hey, we have the talent, we have this, we have that." But when you only have after Saturday 8 games together, it's not. I don't think that's really going to be prepared for the monster that Philly's going to present down the line, like you mentioned with the bang-up process. So I agree with that.
I think 6 or 7's right. Oh, you can go ahead, Jake.
I was just gonna say, I'm not saying that they're the Clippers of last year, but it's similar where that team never really turned it on, right? They were just waiting to get to the playoffs, and then, they never got there. So I'd be curious if a similar situation. I'm not saying they're going to drop a 3-1 lead, but just the fact that they never reached their postseason ceiling that everyone thought they'd get, I wouldn't be shocked that didn't happen with Brooklyn.
Yeah, I mean, they set themselves up for an interesting situation by not even trying. Like that game, they're going to get blown out by Philly, and all of a sudden they mount a comeback with their second and third stringers, and then Kyrie sits on the bench in a very winnable game. Who would have thought we would have been this neck and neck where it actually makes all the world? Because my biggest concern is not who we play in the conference finals. My concern is who we play in the semi, like second round. Like I I get we have all this talent, but and it great basketball to like go through all that adversity. But we've had so much adversity this season, especially the injuries and the COVID protocols that have been so inconsistent across the league.
Well, another point too with the Nets is that when you have the big three back on the court, and obviously, like I said, Saturday's going to mark the 8th game. All the role players talk about it. Hey, Harden makes my life easier, but how are they going to really adjust come postseason when all three are in the lineup and adjusting their roles? We've seen Nash and the Nets over time with, okay, KD out, Kyrie in, KD in, Kyrie in. A lot of those role players make a lot of miscues and schemes, defensive sets, especially on defense. So when you have all those three together, yeah, your role on offense is going to be lessened. You're not going to have really too much else to do normally than what you have been demanded for when those guys were out. But in the playoffs, it's going to be interesting to see if those role players can really solidify those roles when all three are on the court together. That's my issue
definitely.
too.
Offense, not too concerned, especially with a healthy Harden because he's so unpredictable in the way he performs. Slicing and dicing, controlling the offense, scoring, not scoring. I mean, I am still worried about his 3-point shooting. It's been really concerning throughout the games we've had him play, which is most of the season. Defensively, the communication on defense, I think Blake Griffin helps a lot, but I still wish we tried filling that hole of LaMarcus, which it really is unfortunate. It would have been so interesting to see. I hope they give him this ring. I mean, that's to me the reason why I would love Brooklyn to win it all is because there's certain players, and LaMarcus is in the top of that list just because the amount of time he's been with us, but his career, he deserves it, of course. But you have Jared Allen, you have Karis LeVert, Torian Prince, and the other guys who help build this culture, help were the foundation. So the Nets win, they're likely getting offered that ring. So there's an extra passion for me to want them to win this season compared to like next. Like, yeah, we got Harden, we should, have that win it all mentality. But to transition, who do you have winning it all?
I think at this point, if healthy, I think the Lakers are still the favorite. I really do. I mean, that's what I made a bunch of calls to execs on the league yesterday and Wednesday. We're recording this on a Friday, and that's what everyone was saying. If they're healthy, I'm not betting against LeBron and AD. I'm not saying that's who's going to win the title, but I think they're the favorite. I think whoever comes out of the West, they're going to be so battle tested. As much as we're saying that the Milwaukee Philly team going against the Milwaukee Brooklyn winner going against Philly is going to be tough. I think the team getting out of the West, it's a big difference between getting out of the West and going to the finals and getting out of the second round. Oh my God, now we got to turn around and play Philly in the conference finals, right? There's like a gap involved. There's going to be more momentum. People are like going to turn up for the finals. I think whoever gets out of that Western juggernaut with Utah, Phoenix, and Denver, and both LA teams, I think whoever goes out west whoever wins it out west is going to take it all.
Okay. And as a bonus, who do you give your end of season awards to?
I'm not a big awards guy. I would give the MVP to Jokic. I give credit to Tom Thibodeau in New York. As much as kudos to Monty Williams. Take my hat off to him. Literally take my hat off to him. I mean, he's got a team that's got multiple all-stars on it and a lot of talent, and should they be the 2 seed, and maybe they overperform, but I think what Tom Thibodeau did, no one thought they'd be contending for the 4 seed, let alone making the playoffs.
I thought 30-ish wins.
Yeah, so to the same effect, I mean, Julius Randle, I think, obviously the most improved player. I think I'd still give the 6th man to Jordan Clarkson, even though he's kind of fallen off a little bit. But what he's done with Donovan Mitchell being out has been, I think, something to be applauded. And in the beginning of the year, I mean, he just never missed, right? Like anytime I watched the Jazz, I felt like he was just throwing in these moon balls that were flying through the net. Defensive player of the year, they've been calling for it and screaming for it all year long that Ben Simmons should get it. I mean, I'll give Doc Rivers that. that one. Am I missing any awards?
Executive, I think, and rookie.
Rookie, everyone gave it to LaMelo. I'm going Anthony Edwards. That guy is a freaking stud. I mean, what he's done the last couple weeks, especially just overall post All-Star. I mean, Chris Finch has kind of maximized him and really made an effort, I think, to get him shooting at the rim and from behind the three-point line. We've seen a lot less of those, step back, fall away mid-rangers, and he's been scoring like 20 plus,
Do you
23
think
plus
that
assists.
LaMelo's injury made this race so much closer than anyone would have realized?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think if LaMelo doesn't get hurt, he takes it wire to wire. Executive of the year. I mean, I knocked Monty a little bit, but Phoenix getting Chris Paul and the Jay Crowder acquisition was huge too. I think you got to give it to James Jones and Jeff Bauer and that group.
Well, I'd love to disagree with you there. It's not easy enough to get one or two superstars, but to have a third. I mean, yeah, but like
Listen,
we've all talked about the time they played together and all these X factors that we had no control over. But yeah, go.
James Harden said I wanted to go to Brooklyn. By all accounts, Houston did not want to trade him to Philly, and the package they gave up for him still was probably the richest package they still could have given up. I mean, look, flashback to Kawhi in 2019 or 2018 when everyone knew he wanted out of San Antonio. The Spurs only got a first-round pick, DeMar DeRozan, and Jakob Poeltl for him because pretty much the whole league said we're going to price them out. Like, we're not giving up too much for him because we know he wants to get out. Harden was putting on weight and partying and doing whatever, and the Nets still gave up all first-round picks, Karras, Jarrett. I mean, sure, give him credit for landing Harden, but just because James Harden said I want to play in Brooklyn and they traded for him, I'm not giving Sean Marks that award. I'm sorry.
I don't know. Then there was one meteor who completely knocked off Marks and said to give it to Presti, but it's not a future award; it is a season award. So I'm glad you laughed by that because I thought this CBS reporter has some interesting takes throughout the season.
I'm not going to comment on another reporter's opinions, but I will definitely say that
we can talk off the record.
I don't think Sam Presti is deserving of executive of the year this year. I think that award should be reflective of executives who put their team in position to win the championship.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, definitely. But anyways, Jake, unless there are any nice little tidbits you want to share with us before we sign off, thank you so much for joining us, taking some time out of your day to join Chris and I. And plug away one last time.
Built to Lose, How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever on Amazon, on bookshop.org, wherever you want to buy it. And I actually have a partnership now with this watch company called La Terrain, where any watch that you buy, you get a free copy of the book. So
that's pretty
they got
cool.
They got a lot of great collectible watches for like $100 too that look like $600,000 watches and they're high quality. So that's my pitch there too.
Well, great. And where should everyone follow you and follow your book and your journey?
Yeah, I'm at Jake L. Fisher, FISCHER on Twitter. That's pretty much where the hub of all my stuff. That's my same account on Instagram, but I don't post on Instagram really. I'm a Twitter guy.
Built a tweet. We get it.
Tweet, yeah.
Yep, and guys, all that material will be in the description below, so make sure to check it out. But remember to send over any suggestions, questions, comments, or thoughts on any of our content by sending an email to wingspanpodcast@gmail.com. And do not forget to follow us on social media. But most importantly, make sure you subscribe to our podcast, your preferred listening service. As for next time, stay classy and take care.